Hello everyone and welcome to this latest video discussion as part of the RICS Tech Partner Programme. My name is Andrew Knight and I've been working now for RICS for about 12 years. I sit within our knowledge and practice part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the impact of data and technology right across the built and in natural environment. And with over 110,000 members working worldwide, right across that property life cycle through land, planning and development, construction, finance, valuation, property and building management, brokerage. It's a very, very broad canvas upon which data and tech is having a profound effect. And indeed, our members also work across all the various asset types, whether that's land itself, commercial, alternative assets, and infrastructure and residential. So a really, really broad spectrum of assets and life cycle that our members get involved with. And today I'm really pleasure to have Matt join me from LAIIER. So welcome to the discussion, Matt.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I'd love to give. Yeah, please go for it.
I was going to say, before we get into the bits and bytes, it's always great to have a bit of kind of the human side of things, and be great to hear about your backstory and the origin story of LAIIER, if we may.
Yeah. Of course. I was obviously enthusiastically about to offer that, so thank you for asking. So yeah, my name is Matt Johnson. I'm CEO and co-founder of LAIIER. I have a background in printed electronics, and the reason that's important is that most of our customers would describe LAIIER as a smart tape. And really, our product proposition is about preventing water leaks, preventing the damage that comes from water leaks, and really focusing on this incredibly costly problem of water leaking from equipment and failures of the building envelope in the building. I moved to the UK in 2007, actually, to study for a master's in industrial design engineering, and got absolutely hooked into this field called printed electronics. And that is fundamentally the concept of using a printing process to make an electronic object. And the latest iteration of that in my career is a series of sensors which are truly like pieces of tape. So they're sticky on one side, they have a sensing, sets of sensing electrodes on the other side, and they're very easy to apply into a space. And in 2021, we launched LAIIER with the focus on finding water leaks in places that are otherwise very, very challenging to find, and preventing the business interruption costs and the claims costs that come with that.
And I'm struck in some respects, Matt, that you know, in one way that the way we build and design commercial buildings has changed. We now use much more technology than ever before. But in some respects, apart from using some kind of high performance materials, we build really things in the same way, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. I think that. So we retrofit a lot of technology into buildings. The sticker or tape-like format is a great way to quickly apply technology into a space. And that means that we see lots and lots of buildings. And what we see constantly is that buildings are filled with technology, but the actual chassis of the building, the core structure is always very, very old, and the methods by which we construct buildings haven't really changed. And for us, that's a really interesting innovation space, because I sometimes use the example of the Nest thermostat. Before Nest or Hive, automated thermostats existed, I don't think anyone saw that as an innovation space. They thought thermostats have one role, they're kind of boring. We see the building membrane as a similar space. It looks boring. It's assumed to be a commodity product, but in fact, with technology like ours, we see that that's a huge opportunity for innovation.
So I guess on the one hand, there's this opportunity to build this kind of technology from day one into the materials we use, but clearly that's great for development, and that should be something we're looking at. But I guess we've got this, I think, as you mentioned before, this huge opportunity around retrofit, given the majority of buildings are already built. So how does that kind of retrofit piece work in comparison to new construction, the way you're working at the moment?
Sure. So I see three stages that we are approaching the market, but I think they're more broadly is three different ways of viewing how we install technology into buildings. And we would call the first stage the sticker stage, but that's really retrofit. The second is a renovation stage, which we would call modular. And then the third is a new construction or kind of OEM construction stage. And I think we see a few trends converging. So you have a need for new technology to make buildings more efficient, to reduce costs, to make them healthier. So there's a drive to install tech. So anything that can be retrofitted easily is going to gain traction in the market. But there is also this significant driver to renovate or retrofit existing buildings so as to avoid the carbon costs and the monetary costs of building an entirely new structure. And I think that's resulting in things like modular bathrooms for hotels and hospitals, as an example of one trend where you're really assembling something in a factory and then putting it into a building. So not a complete modular building, but a kind of partially modular building. And we see that that's probably where technology like ours, which is gesturing towards smart building materials, will get its first really large piece of traction. Just for the simple reason that it's easy for us to engineer, say, a very large printed sensor. So I showed you a tape, but we can make any shape we want effectively. It's easy for us to engineer, say, a water leak sensing floor that goes into a modular bathroom. And it's easier than retrofitting, and it's easier than kind of imagining a giant roll of material because we know that every bathroom is the same. And so I think that buildings will get very quickly smart through that modularization drive because the engineering is easier.
Yeah, I suppose that feels like a natural evolution, doesn't it? Because there'll be so much retrofit renovation work going on, and also with this other drive to use, you say, modular in addition to that volumetric approach. There is this opportunity now to, as you say, drop an entire module in that the chassis, as you described it, already has this technology in there. I mean, where do you see the evolution of this coming into the new construction phase? Do you think the industry's ready and able to sort of take this on really from the groundworks up?
It's fun. It's interesting because I think most people, many stakeholders would agree that building more intelligence into a building from the point of construction is a good thing to do, and it will provide a lot of benefit. But the challenge is that not all stakeholders are necessarily motivated to do that, or they lack an individual motivation. So a good example is us working with companies that manufacture waterproofing membranes for buildings. I've long held the thesis that we should be printing sensors onto waterproofing materials, vapor barriers, roofing materials, to understand the performance of the building envelope. And if you really print it at scale, the per square unit area cost is very, very low. But most of those membrane manufacturers or building materials manufacturers are very conservative, making essentially commodity products, and don't understand how or why they would want to monetize that new type of product, which would likely become a service. So the people who would make it don't feel incentivized, but they're the only ones that can contribute to it. And then on the other side, you need companies that will ingest that information and make it actionable and useful. So there's definitely, there's a kind of, everyone nods their head saying, yes, we need this, but it's hard to figure out who should take the first step to provide it.
And do you see, as this whole area evolves, what this role of smart building materials will look like, and what other changes you might see? Because clearly you've focused very much on this water detection, but there'll presumably be other kind of issues whereby putting technology into the chassis, as you described it, into the fabric in that way, will help in a number of ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a roadmap of functions that you can create that are valuable. I think the most basic ones for us is about reducing the cost of a water leak event. So, in the US, water damage to buildings accounts for around 56% of insurance claims, which is incredible. It's just such a pervasive problem. So from the insurance perspective, there's a real motivation to install technology to reduce that. So it makes insurers more profitable. Hopefully it would help them reduce insurance premiums that are charged to customers, right? So it kind of is a win-win for businesses, especially like hotels. I'm sitting in a hotel right now. If there's a significant water leak in this room, they have to take it out of service. And so that downtime is costly and immediately calculable. And so there's a motivation on both sides to do that. But I think as we look towards more and more exotic functions that smart building materials could enable, it's harder to define a specific value proposition, but it's easy to imagine that you could create one. And for me, one of the kind of furthest out examples is that we see that climate change is making the urban water cycle and urban weather much less predictable. And the negative effects of that are things like storm drain systems being overwhelmed because the rainfall events are infrequent but more extreme. And capturing data about the external environment feels like a really important thing to do. And buildings have a huge surface area to the external environment. And so, whether we're measuring something inside, like water leaks or occupancy or energy consumption, or measuring something about the outside, like air quality, different points of information about the weather, I think that there's a big opportunity for making the skin of the building more and more intelligent.
And I guess from what you're already doing, from that kind of predictive maintenance side, it's not so much just sort of potential water coming in from outside, but I guess you're also able to pick up machinery that's beginning to leak. So you're beginning to pick up that whole kind of cycle of the M&E beginning to fail in certain points, as well as just that water ingress from outside.
Exactly. At the very minimum, we are a reactive solution. So you might not expect that something would fail, and then it does fail, and so you can react as quickly as possible. But I do think there is a predictive aspect to what we're doing in some use cases as well, partially because anyone who operates a large asset realizes that it's always imperfect. It's not like yesterday I was in a 50-story building, there's always something wrong in a structure that large. And so actually, in terms of producing a more effective maintenance regime, I think understanding how badly something is not working is quite important. Being able to triage and knowing, look, we recognize this is an issue, the issue is not getting any worse, we're going to deal with that next month. And so I do think we are trying to move towards that more predictive model rather than just reactive.
I guess on one point, I guess that often comes up when we talk about any aspect of making assets smarter in this way is sometimes the complexity that you create by doing that, in terms of knitting systems together into a tech stack, having kind of some standardization about the way the data is being communicated, and cybersecurity issues, and I guess that's been an area you presumably have had to look at as well, how you integrate your solution with a smart building, and how you also address those kind of risks and issues as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think we were at a customer yesterday, and they expressed exactly the same feeling that I feel as a consumer of information within our business, which is that they do not want yet another dashboard or platform that they have to look at. And I think that basic feeling of being overwhelmed is probably the biggest decision point in someone adopting our solution. So we are very happy, and in fact, with all of our customers, encourage that they should adopt an API integration model. So we want to give our information to their building management system, facilities ticketing system. At the most basic, we can just send reports through an email address. I mean, that is the absolutely the most basic. We do have a dashboard on our platform that people can look at to understand the data with a lot of nuance, but it's every smart building show that I go to shows a huge amount of visualization of data, which is exciting for the people who have created the data. And I'm guilty of that too, because I think it's really interesting. But then I recognize that for a customer, actually that's overwhelming and it's exhausting. And all they want to know is, can I trust the technology? Is it giving me the information that I expect it to give? And then I only want to hear from it when I need to hear from it. And so what is the absolute minimum that we can do to do that? And it's actually the way that our customers often say that in meetings is they say, please don't make me have another tab open in my browser. and And it's a great, it's like,
Yeah.
it's a great shorthand, because I feel the same way. Please don't make me have another tab open that I have to pay attention to.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, has it come up in a positive sense that from that kind of ESG sustainability point of view, what this kind of stuff can deliver is obviously, it might feel small, but if you've got a persistent leak from your water system and that's wasted water, if you end up having to do repairs because of water damage, that's more embodied carbon you're putting back into the buildings. Are people kind of joining up the dots here, Matt, in terms of that sense of this is also part of that overall sustainability piece?
Yeah, so that is within the first few questions I ask every customer. How sensitive are you personally, or how sensitive is your organization to ESG metrics? Is our ability to demonstrate that you're preventing water damage important? Is it that we're saving some quantity of water, or we're saving building materials because we prevented damage? So you didn't have to purchase a huge amount of new drywall or gypsum boards, right? And I would say that it's very market specific. So we have customers in Germany for whom that is a clear priority that they articulate. They articulate across the organization. I would say in the UK, it is a clear priority, but it feels like something that specific teams are advocating for to the rest of the organization. And in the US, it's very piecemeal. It's not necessarily a priority. I think the only nuance to that is direct ESG reporting, where we do have customers who own property and act as a landlord for, and their tenants are starting to have to produce ESG reports for their investors. So the tenants are then asking the building for very specific information. So the building is then forced to produce it. So the consequence is that landlord, that property owner, is then willing to invest in technology because they're more likely to get a high quality tenant.
Yeah.
So I find that so fascinating how that trickles down and what the motivation is for that, for capturing this data.
It is. I mean, it's fascinating that the whole dynamics, isn't it? Because you get that combination of pressures and forces from occupiers, from asset owners, and then the regulatory environment. Sometimes it is a fascinating interplay. I mean, do you see that being particularly different for different asset types? You've mentioned hotels and obviously offices, and obviously commercial real estate is a very broad spectrum. Are you seeing, you've mentioned differences market by market, but are you seeing any kind of commonality across asset types?
That's a good question. It's very anecdotal, right? So it's just, that's an important caveat. But I think we don't see the drive towards ESG in multifamily at all.
No?
That's not a conversation that we have had. Large kind of signature properties seem much more sensitive to it. And I think that's often because the organizations that we're dealing with will use one building as an example of their portfolio, and they tend to use the most spectacular building that they have. So it might not, the organization's sensitivity to it isn't evenly distributed across all of their assets, right? They might really care for a large office building in New York, but for their properties in Cleveland or something like that, they're less sensitive. And we find that in the UK as well, that we work with a few companies who have a kind of signature property where they're really sensitive, and the plan is to then roll out innovations to other properties.
No, and I guess that makes sense, because I think there can sometimes be a hesitation or a concern about ROI on prop tech in general, and I guess one can commend people for at least piloting it, maybe on a flagship asset, as you say.
Yeah.
But again, gaining the confidence to say to the CFO, look, there's demonstrable savings here. We, as you say, either in terms of business interruption or repair savings or just the predictive maintenance piece. If you can show that kind of incremental, agile ROI, and maybe that's the way we get a lot of these technologies really adopted.
Yeah, exactly. Well, sometimes we'll get questions from well, specifically from like venture capitalists, right, who are interested in us as a startup, then they'll ask us, oh, well, why, you're talking to a really large company. Well, why wouldn't they scale to thousands of units of your sensors, right? Well, and it's um, and I always try to explain very carefully that no customer will ever scale like that. I mean, even for us, if someone tries to sell us a piece of technology, as a relatively small team, I'm not going to suddenly implement it across the whole organization. I'm going to say, well, I will give it a try, or a few of us will give it a try, and we'll see. And I think that's the only way that new prop technology gets selected, is project by project. And there has to be a lot of confidence building, because as soon as you start touching the physical asset, you're creating a lot of risk. And there's also the risk that if you have to undo something, it's incredibly expensive. I mean, our biggest fear is putting something in the field that's not effective and requires someone to go back out to all of those units to make some sort of change, because it just would eat up everyone's energy.
Yeah. No, and I think it's an important point, but hopefully it's a positive point that the market as a whole is understanding that it is this pilot, roll, extend,
Definitely.
and obviously, given these are live assets, there are certain points where it's more practical to come in and make these changes. You can't just chuck everybody out, as it were. You need to sort of see where there are breaks in leases, or all those kind of events where you can put this sort of stuff in.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we have learned is where in the cycle should we really be talking to the customer, because if they're doing a significant retrofit or renovation, that's a great time to talk to them. And also, what some of our customers have 20 properties or 20 assets, and others have 2,000. And if you're talking to someone who has 2,000, they always have simultaneous retrofits and renovations. Whereas talking to someone who has 20, they might be only doing one retrofit a year. And so that is an important learning for us about how does that market work, because that's not our business.
No, and I suppose it's an interesting point when I talk to a lot of our tech partners, that blend of what you bring in terms of technical knowledge, but then that learning around the idiosyncrasies of commercial real estate and the fact that you have to go with the flow to an extent, don't you?
Totally, because the cycles are long and the assets are valuable, and which is very different to our technology, which we can rapidly iterate and apply.
And I guess I suppose that probably highlights perhaps a fundamental frustration that maybe the prop tech market has with the sector they're selling into, that actually there's this fast, dynamic sector developing solutions, and then a customer segment or segments where you have this totally different kind of time frame of thinking and investment and financing and events that give you the opportunity to implement the technology.
Well, yes, there is a disconnect, and I think that a lot of founders don't have the empathy for what a commercial real estate developer does on a day-to-day basis. And I definitely find that people get frustrated that customers don't adopt quickly enough, that they try to push them to adopt faster, but you can't change the way that market works in terms of the cycles. And the important thing is, in my view, is to work with a broad enough set of customers that we're willing to work against anyone's given time frame, but we have so many deals in the works that there's always something that's growing. Within the kind of startup world, there is an attempt to take the incredibly fast-moving software model in terms of iterating the product very quickly, and growing really fast, and trying to apply that to commercial real estate. And I think that it fundamentally conflicts with the way that the industry works. And so there is frustration there, but I just see that as a bit silly. It's like you can't take the model of building, say, a social media company or a payments company and then apply it to somebody whose family has owned a building for 100+ years. It's just a very different mindset.
Indeed, but I guess it's so important for both sides to understand each other's and each other's dynamics
Exactly.
and work together in that way. Well, Matt, it's been
Yeah.
fascinating to chat. I really enjoyed this conversation. It's been very enlightening on a number of topics, and I look forward to catching up later. But for today, thanks ever so much for your time.
Well, thank you as well, Andrew. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope that everybody will come check us out. We are LAIIER.io.
Indeed. Thanks again, Matt.
Thanks.